to you, who will be moderating the session today, and I hand it over to Catherine. Thank you.
No, go. It just kicked in. Thank you very much. Very good to see you. So I am really honored and pleased to be able to be here up here, and you're going to see very shortly online, to be joined by an esteemed group of women at the forefront of global gender justice, and in particular, gender justice for Afghan women and girls. So in your materials, you have the longer biographies of these amazing colleagues. So I'm going to be really short in the presentation so that we can get to the questions. But so let me do that. And I refer you to their very long biographies, which really gives you a sense of the kind of expertise that you have up here and online today. So first, we'll go to Shinkai Karokhail, who is a human rights activist and former Afghan ambassador to Canada and former member of parliament. During her government service, she helped create the Women's Parliamentary Caucus and assisted in drafting Afghanistan's elimination of violence against women law. Welcome. Next to her, we have Wazhma Frogh, who is a human rights lawyer and peacebuilding practitioner with over 25 years of experience in legislative advocacy, conflict resolution, and women's rights. She founded the Women and Peace Studies organization, supporting Afghan women's participation in peace processes, and is a former counselor on Afghanistan's High Peace Council. Here I have Zarifa Yacobi, who is a human rights activist and journalist dedicated to gender justice in Afghanistan, is a founding member of the Afghan Women's Movement for Equality. She began her career as an educator, becoming the first female teacher in the Khadir district of Afghanistan, and later working in the Ministry of Education. And she's here with her translator. We're very thankful to joining us here today. And I think we have online, I'm not seeing them just yet. Oh, wonderful. Online. Welcome. Good to see you. Hopefully you can see us here in the room, but we can see you. We have Hanifa Girowal, who's a member of the high-level expert group on gender justice with experience advocating for gender justice both in UN special procedures and civil society. She's a senior program officer at Counterpart International, where she focused on advancing human rights, legal advocacy, and human rights accountability. And she served as senior advisor to UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. Next, we have Anna-Pála Sverrisdóttir, who's the Humanitarian Director at the Icelandic Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Chair of the National Committee on International Humanitarian Law. Previously based in New York and Brussels, she served in various diplomatic roles since 2011. She's ample experience mainstreaming gender equality, which is a foreign policy priority of Iceland. And last, but of course not least, Professor Valerie Oosterveld is the Western Research Chair in International Criminal Justice, professor at Western Law. She's also the special advisor on crimes against humanity to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. So welcome. It's really a remarkable panel that we have here today. So I'm going to do some table setting. Some of you have heard this already in the room, but I know that there's many joining online and additional individuals who are joining us in the room. So I'll start with just talking about some facts, and the facts that everyone in this room know intimately, but I think is worth stating in the context of this discussion, which focuses on legal accountability. So since the 2021 takeover, the Taliban has established what it can only really fairly be characterized as an institutionalized regime of oppression and subjugation of Afghan women and girls. One of the very first acts was to create an all-male government, expelling women from all positions of leadership, and over the intervening 3.5 years enacted a comprehensive collection of edicts systematically stripping Afghan women and girls of their most basic human rights. So of course we know about the banning of Afghan women and girls from receiving an education beyond primary school. We know about the banning of women from nearly all forms of employment, including working in government, international organizations, civil society, most economic sectors. We know about the banning of women and girls from nearly all public spaces, such as gyms, restaurants, health centers, from obtaining a driver's license, traveling without a male chaperone, even speaking or singing in public. In effect, Afghan women and girls have been erased from public life. This is what it means to erase in the sense of of erasure of fundamental human rights across the board. As we've talked about a bit already today, and as many of you again know, there's a growing international momentum to hold the Taliban accountable. And we have heard from Canada, we've heard the announcement by Canada, by Australia, Germany, and the Netherlands of their intention to hold Taliban accountable for violations of the CEDAW Convention. Now, the CEDAW Convention is quite special. It is a highly ratified multilateral instrument that is regarded widely as the International Bill of Rights for Women. Of course, it stands for the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. It's garnered near universal participation by 189 countries worldwide. And it protects women from discrimination in the exercise of fundamental rights, rights to work, education, health, participation in public and private life. So as you can tell, really what we have here is a situation in which a government in this world has circumscribed the rights systematically, hitting nearly every protection that is enshrined in this International Bill of Rights for Women. Article 29 of that convention is a potential pathway to hold states legally accountable. And this is what part of our conversation will be on this panel. And that includes before the International Court of Justice. Now, there's all kinds of preconditions before that case can take place. There needs to be negotiations. There needs to be what's called an organization or an agreement, perhaps on arbitration for at least 6 months. Only then is the door open. So this can take months. It can take years. There's precedent for these kinds of engagements taking years, but ultimately, possibly could end up in the International Court of Justice. So potentially a first step, at least of several steps towards accountability. And just to note that more than 26 states have explicitly expressed their support for the raising of this dispute on the international plane. So in addition, as you've heard, we have the ICC. You've heard from the deputy prosecutor this morning. In November, 6 states, Chile, Costa Rica, Spain, France, Luxembourg, Mexico, referred the situation in Afghanistan to the ICC. And you've, of course, heard about the decision last month where the prosecutor announced the decision to apply for arrest warrants for the Taliban Supreme Leader and Chief Justice for the crime against humanity of gender persecution. So again, developments. At the same time, we see the Taliban has taken steps on the world stage, including by participating in a series of UN meetings in Doha concerning international engagement with the Taliban. The Afghan women were absent in that room. Those negotiations continued, but it is notable the Afghan women were excluded. We also are looking at a situation where increasingly embassies are being accepted worldwide. There's different types of delegations in trade and other sectors. So the Taliban is engaging incrementally across the globe. So that's the context, that's the table setting that I wanted to lay out. So I want to start really by taking stock of where we are to start in terms of ongoing efforts to obtain justice for women and girls of Afghanistan. One thing that we are not drawing on here is a blank slate. There are these amazing efforts across the globe by Afghan women leaders in this respect. So I want to start with you. Shinkai, if I could start with you, if you could describe kind of your engagement and what that has meant so far.
For organizing today's event. Regarding women's efforts, I think women of Afghanistan involvement, and they were central in our ongoing efforts to obtain justice for women of Afghanistan. Their dedication, determination, resilience really marked the history. From the beginning, courageously take on the street, protest, raise their voice, and ask for the fundamental rights, rights to education especially, rights to work, rights to freely move and make decisions for themselves. It became the cause that other women learn what the rights they have and how they can stand for that values. Women of Afghanistan, every woman, I cannot say that who protested or those did not protest. Every woman, whether they were inside Afghanistan and they were forced to leave. It wasn't a choice to leave Afghanistan. Those who left Afghanistan, they had their own obligation to leave because they couldn't survive there, or they could not tolerate and live in an open prison. So women from that protest start to develop their own network. They built their own alliance and start to advocate and lobby with foreign governments to bring Taliban to justice or to make them accountable what they are doing, the way they are violating the fundamental rights of Afghan women. Not only to advocating for that, almost every woman in a different way, in a different means, they start to how to work for those who are highly at risk inside Afghanistan. Those become the victim of those violence, how to provide them some services from medication, psychosocial therapy, giving them food, shelter, or take them to another safe place. So many things women did. They did remarkable stuff. Not only to provide them those, but they start to document all those violation cases. They risked their life. They wrote and shared all those stories through underground network and bring them to the level of like at the global stage and talk about that. They also start to work with international bodies like UN, Human Rights Council, so many other international human rights organizations, politicians, parliaments, governments, to how they should amplify the voice of women, to take their message to the international stage. Also, women of Afghanistan work with ICC. Today we are the witness, I'm happy that a woman, Nashat Shabnam Khan, I think, she mentioned about the way how Afghan women work with them and how they documented all those violations, and today they issued the request for the warrant case for the supreme leader of Taliban. So all these efforts women are made, just how to make the other government, not only Afghanistan, that women's right is indivisible from human rights, and nobody can violate that. If they violate that, they will be accountable what they are doing to the women of Afghanistan or globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And absolutely a reminder of how instrumental in terms of evidence gathering the Afghan women leaders have been for ICC proceedings, for special procedures mandates. So thank you for that. Wazhma, I wanted to go to you next. And there's one particular aspect of efforts to obtain justice, which is the need for consensus building. So nothing can fracture an effort to build justice and accountability than a fractured alliance in terms of the voices. At the same time, the diversity of viewpoints should be celebrated. How do we balance that? And in the context of describing some of the coalition building efforts that I know you've been involved in.
Thank you. Thank you. I also would like to thank Massey College and everybody who has been involved in putting this conference together. It's so important because these are the times that Afghan women who are inside Afghanistan are looking up to. Like, I had colleagues who actually were asking me that, tell us what happened after that conference. So there are eyes in Afghanistan of younger girls who are just waiting to hear what happened in that conference. Is there going to be a ray of hope? Because the circumstances on the ground is very grave. But what I want to start with, Catherine, a couple of clarifications. One is that when you say Afghan women, I wish we were that homogeneous, but we are not. It's a very, very complicated group of people, just like any other complicated group of people in other part of the world. So there are many different, social groups, Afghan and different ethnic groups, linguistic groups, demographics, who are in better social life, those who have better off communities. So we have different groups of categories of Afghan women. And that's why when we say, are Afghan women included, I would ask, which Afghan women? And that's an important question for me. Because that consensus building should not actually depict us as a homogeneous, uniform group of people, that we are not. It's a country, when I came to Canada, I was told that this country is a mosaic of different groups, and that's the beauty of it. Similarly, Afghanistan, it's a mosaic of different ethnicities, different groups. Some people, from the northern parts, even in the north. Like I have a colleague who came from the north and who has been, like I've worked with her in the past, like even in the north, northeast, north, south. So there are different aspects of demographic that's important to keep in mind. The other thing is that our pursuit of justice did not start with ICC, actually, a notification, I have to say. Having been involved, and this woman that I'm sitting next to has been actually fighting for the law that actually, for the first time, criminalized violence against women. And I remember that day that it was Minister of Justice, Donish, right? Sverrisdóttir. He did not, and this is the Republic government before the Taliban. He did not accept the word of kiramat insani, the human dignity, to be part of the law. And Shinkai was literally about to beat him up because he would say, why do women need kiramat insani or human dignity? Okay, we are trying to put violence, we are criminalizing violence, but why do you need the human dignity? So I have to say that we are dealing with an Afghanistan and a lot of patriarchy that's embedded in our realities, like many other societies in different parts of the world, not just our part of the world. So our pursuit of justice started actually for many, many years ago. So when we came to Afghanistan, I was a refugee in Pakistan, and I came in December 2001 when the US toppled the first Taliban government. And from them, I remember being a young 20-year-old girl at that time. Now you know my age. Anyways. Okay. So how much we worked on creating accountability, because in our part of the world, accountability is considered, it's very something external, it's very alien. But we managed to create a lot of accountability mechanisms, including laws and the legal structure. But I have to say that when in looking at the ICC, when the jurisdiction came into effect, let's say after 2003, the Taliban did not just started committing crimes in the past 3-4 years. They have been committing crimes actually even when they were, an insurgent group. So they were using, different forms of violence against women, rape as an act of war. We have been documenting, for example, ethnic cleansing that had happened by them. We have documented, for example, other forms of, cruel torture, acts that the Taliban as insurgency have committed. And the ICC, we, have been asking ICC that not just the Taliban, but the US government, forces, other, forces who were part of the Afghanistan military structures, they actually made a lot of war crimes. They committed a lot of war crimes. We need accountability of all of that. I cannot be selective that I want justice for this and not for that, right? So we started from that time, and it's very important to say that when the Taliban took, before the takeover, when the Doha deal started happening, we very much mobilized ourselves. We were lobbying for inclusion of women, we were lobbying for responding women's needs, and also guarantees that you're signing a deal with the Taliban. What is the guarantee that this group will not actually, overturn all the progress that we made in 20 years? And we did not have any guarantees, and that's what happened. So, am I good? You can do my time. Few more. So, in 2001, August, I remember that the Taliban started actually taking up villages and districts in July and May, from May actually, it was an Eid. So we started documenting a lot of violations, and that is something that I'm so proud of. This is the work that we started very indigenously on our own without any international, standardized human rights documentation system. We literally put together the stories, the things that were happening in different provinces. In September 2001 was the time that we actually had these reports being published. Like, I know some people in this room actually received those bi-weeklies, the human rights update, that comes from 34 provinces. And they go to a lot of international partners. And that's what we have been pushing. And we have been documenting all of these, human rights violations. It's not just on women, I have to say. Actually, many other, and I would come to it later, that many other elements of the crime, other crimes, are also part of what the Taliban are doing. And we'll discuss that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And thank you for that. And a good reminder too, that a key piece of work that's being done by these organizations is not just the collection of the stories, but when it comes to legal accountability, those stories have to be translated into evidence that have certain indicia of reliability, of authentication requirements, et cetera. And so more and more of these lawyers are going out to train as to how to translate stories into admissible evidence for purposes of justice and proceedings. So thank you for that. Zarifa, if I could go to you now, you truly, as an educator, a hero, I want you to speak, please, to civil society efforts and the contribution to justice on behalf of Afghan girls and women.
برادران عزیز، السلام علیکم و رحمت الله و برکاته. چه افتخاری بالاتر از این که در این پنل در کنار شما دغدغه‌های مشترک ما را به اشتراک بگذاریم، برای فردای بهتر و روشن‌تر همصدا شویم. امروز قلب‌هایمان برای افغانستان می‌تپد، برای زنانی که در اون سرزمین بار سنگین و تبعیض را به دوش می‌کشند.
So first of all, hello everybody, and thank you for giving us a panel to be here and share our stories and our problems. So I would like to introduce myself. I am Marzia Mohammadi, one of the girls and women who protested in the streets of Kabul after August 2021. And we are in the same movement, like we have Afghan women now, they have different movements and groups who are protesting and doing advocacy for human rights and for women's rights. So today I'm here to translate what Zarifa is going to share. She just greeted to everybody, and she wants to share the stories and efforts that Afghan women, especially the protesters, the civil society has done since August 2021.
بسیار معذرت میخوایم از اینکه ما انگلیسی درست گپ زدن نمیتونم. همکار ما خانم محمدی ترجمه میکند و تلاش میکنیم که در آینده ها، در برنامه های آینده خوب روان انگلیسی گپ بزنیم.
She promises that she will learn English soon and she will share her story directly.
در دوران حاکمیت نظام جمهوریت، جامعه مدنی و بعد از فروپاشی نظام جمهوریت به قدرت رسیدن دوباره گروه تروریستان طالب و در افغانستان تنها قدرتی که در مقابل طالب بودن زنای افغانستان بودن. چی زنای افغانستان در بیرون بوده و چی در داخل بودن که در داخل زنای افغانستان جنبش‌های اعتراضی را تشکیل دادن که و اینجا چند تا همکاری را می‌بینیم که نرگس سادات 66 روز زندان طالب را تجربه کردن. صابره جان اکبری که اولین دخترای هستند در مقابل طالب تظاهرات را راه اندازی کردن و در پاکستان اولین کسایی هستند که اعتصاب غذایی راجع به جندر آپارتاید کردن که آپارتاید جنسیتی را به رسمیت بشناسید. و مرزیه جان محمدی همچنین از زنایی بودند که تظاهرات را در کابل راه اندازی کردند و آخر مجبور شدند که تا کشور را ترک کنند. امروز به کانادا آمده پناه دهنده شده.
So after the fall of Kabul in August 2021, the only force who stood up against Taliban was the women of Afghanistan. We stood up with empty hands against Taliban, and we did whatever we could do to protect our rights. And there are many of the protesters who were protesting in the streets of Kabul, and we were tortured. For example, Nargis is here, who was present by Taliban for like 66 days. And as well, we have Saber Akbari, who was one of the very first ladies who joined the movements and organized the protests in Kabul. And she was one of the, she was the lady who did hunger strike in Pakistan for recognizing the gender apartheid in Afghanistan. We did all these efforts so that we can protect our rights and we can challenge Taliban's.
شما شاهد هستین از ما مطمئن هستیم هر کدامتان از صفحه توییتر، از صفحه نام جدیدشان اکس و از صفحه مجازی، از رسانه ها در جریان هستین که مانع های بیشمار بر سر زنای افغانستان هستند و زنای افغانستان تا امروز چه در داخل افغانستان و چه در کشورهای اروپایی و کشورهای غربی تلاش میکند و این زنای افغانستان بودند که چهره طالبان را به جهان نشان دادند که او جهانی که بارها تکرار میکردند که طالب 20 سال قبل نیست، طالب تغییر کردند، اما متاسفانه طالب تغییر نکردند. طالب 20 سال قبل هستند و اما تغییر کرده، از 20 سال قبل کرده، با دیپلماسی، با دروغ گفتن، با همه کارا، با خشونت، با سرکوب تغییر کردن که تا امروز علیه زنای افغانستان مبارزه دارن و زنای افغانستان را سرکوب میکنن.
So you might witness and you might see the videos of women and all people of Afghanistan on Twitter or other social medias that what they are going through and what Taliban are doing. And as well, she said that the world was saying that Taliban did not Taliban changed. They are now better than Taliban who were like in 20 years ago, but they are not improving. They have changed. Yeah, now they are lying more. Now they are torturing more. Now they are using more diplomacy, how to torture women and how to erase women from the society. Yeah, they have changed, but in a worst way, in the bad way.
بلکه این تلاش ها را زنای افغانستان وظیفه خود دانسته و بلکه یک ضرور بوده و برای بقای انسانی، برای ساختن جامعه‌ای که در اون هم مرد و هم زن حقوق مساوی و حقوق برابر داشته باشند. من به این باور هستم که قبلا جامعه مدنی افغانستان تا 20 سال یک فعالیت‌های چشمگیر را داشتند. متاسفانه با آمدن طالبان همه از بین رفت. حتی امروز زنها در افغانستان اجازه بیرون رفتن ندارد. شما ببینید امروز در افغانستان با یک پرنده آزادی دارد، اما زنای افغانستان آزادی ندارند. زنایی که در داخل خانه حبس شدند، زنایی که حداقل اجازه لباس پوشیدن ندارند و زنایی هستند که امروز از وضعیت روحی و روانی در داخل افغانستان به سر میبرد که هم از نگاه اقتصادی و هم از نگاه جسمی و هم از نگاه روانی، چون ما تجربه اون را کردم که ما متاسفانه 41 روز در زندان طالب بودیم که ما وضعیت خشونت و سرکوب و شکنجه های گوناگون طالبان را تجربه داریم که بخشی از اون را امروز در اختیار شما و همراه شما به اشتراک میگذاریم.
Civil society of Afghanistan worked and they tried to bring the human rights and women rights in Afghanistan for like 20 years. But after arriving of Taliban, we lost everything. Like we lost the basic rights that we had. Right now, if you see women in Afghanistan, they don't have the very basic rights. They cannot go out, they cannot dress as they want, they cannot go to work, they cannot go to school. A bird in Afghanistan has more freedom than a woman in Afghanistan, because a bird can fly and go wherever it wants, but a woman cannot. A woman is present inside their homes, and they have lost everything. Like any right that you can imagine, we and the women who are living in Afghanistan has lost those rights. Now, Zarifa wants to share some of her pains that she has gone through, because I think she was present for more than a month by Taliban in Afghanistan.
اما هنوز زنای افغانستان راه دراز را پیش روی دارند و ما متحد هستیم و مطمئن هستیم که زنای افغانستان دست به دست هم داده بر یک افغانستان آباد و آزاد تلاش میکند. حداقل زنای افغانستان و دخترای افغانستان از حق و حقوق خود که مربوطشان میشد، ما مطمئن هستیم که زنای افغانستان را از هر راهی شود، چی از راه مبارزه شود، چی از راه دیپلماسی شود، به دست میاره.
We have a very long way ahead. We need to do a lot of things and work all together, especially we women or everybody from Afghanistan who are now out of Afghanistan, and we have more freedom of speech and freedom of saying our ideas and fighting against Taliban. So we have a lot to do. We have to be united and work together so that we can find a solution for the situation now that we have in Afghanistan.
Zarifa, thank you very much for sharing. I know it's not easy, and you, as you tell us, we have hero in you, and we have heroes among us, and there's heroes every day that passes, women who are fighting for their rights and fighting for freedom. So I want to come back to your stories because it's so critical that they be told. But let me move to Hanifa for a moment. Hanifa, if you could please, again, it's the same question, but I'd ask you to come at it from the perspective of women's participation before UN mechanisms in particular.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of this very critical discussion, and especially the Massey College and Payam Akhafan, who is a great friend, colleague, and a member of the high-level expert group, for making sure that the voices of Afghan women are being heard. I think, Catherine, to your questions, engaging of Afghan women in different UN mechanisms, Shinkai Jan also mentioned that Afghan women have been at the forefront of seeking justice since the Taliban take over. And they have used whatever tools and approaches that are existing on international level to ensure that the Afghan women get access and their rights are restored. And today, it's a very critical moment for Afghan women. The UN Special Rapporteur is delivering his recent report on the prevention of vice and promotion of virtue to the Human Rights Council 58th session. And we are also witnessing a dramatic shift toward delivering justice and accountability to women of Afghanistan through different international law tools, such as the ICC and the ICG. The recent ICC prosecutor Karim Agha Khan's public announcement of filing an application of arrest warrant against the Taliban supreme leader and also the Minister of Justice raised a huge attention around the world to the suffering of Afghan women. And I think that was a very critical step that delivered a very strong message to all the international mechanisms that are working on delivering justice and addressing the atrocities being committed around the world, to not only go after the perpetrators behind the closed door, but to have the courage to address the atrocities that are being committed publicly, so that those who are suffering can be supported by the general public as well. and also the very critical actions by the Canada, Germany, and the allied states for taking the Taliban to the ICJ for violating the CEDAW. I think that was a very critical step. We welcome the efforts by the Canada and all by other member states who are there to support Afghan women. And I strongly believe that all of these actions that are being taken and all of these efforts to end the culture of impunity in Afghanistan. I think we all know that historically there hasn't been a lot of attention for delivering justice and accountability in Afghanistan. And somehow the people of Afghanistan have lost all their hopes that there can be a time in the history or in the future where they can have access to justice and where those who are violating the most dire committing the most dire human rights violations can be held accountable. Because unfortunately, every time those who commit the worst sort of violations and crimes, they usually come to the power and they are usually the one who are ruling against these people. So I think all of these very critical actions that we are seeing here is a direct result of the continuous advocacy of Afghan women since last 3 years. They have ensured to be engaged on all the mechanisms that are existing, including the treaty bodies, including the special procedures, including the Human Rights Council and others. However, I think there's still a very huge gap. The only official UN mechanism that is now working on the dire situation of human rights and women's rights in Afghanistan is the mandate of the special rapporteur, which also lack sufficient resources to really document all the atrocities that are being committed and to advocate for women and human rights in Afghanistan. I think in other contexts, we have seen more comprehensive actions being taken by the international community. For example, the UN established a commission of inquiry in the case of Syria. They established an international mechanism of IIIM. The commission of inquiry also investigated the women rights violations cases committed in against the Yazidi women in Iraq by the Daesh Khorasan, which was a very critical moment in the history of international law and for delivering justice to the crimes that are being committed against women's rights. And in the area of gender justice. But unfortunately, in Afghanistan, we do lack that. We lack a very comprehensive mechanism that can address these atrocities. And there is a need for the establishment of a very comprehensive mechanism. We know that Afghan women are very courageous. We heard Zarifa Jan talking about her experience, Marzia Jan here in this room, and so many other Afghan women who are not here in this room with us, but who are fighting both inside and outside the country. And their plea must be heard. I think the international community is always coming and unfortunately criticizing us as Afghan women of not having a unified voice and a unified message, but we are also not seeing any unified message and unified approach by the international community itself against the atrocities that are being committed by the Taliban against Afghan women. For example, I will give a very small example of delivering the international humanitarian aid to the people of Afghanistan. Afghan women has always asked to condition the aid to restoring the women's rights and to ensuring the rights of Afghan people. But not only the international community heard as back then, but now when the aid is being stopped, particularly by some member states, including the US, the advocates are being criticized for this. While we have never asked for the suspension of the aid, our only plea has been conditioning it to restoring the women's rights and human rights. And I think the international community has the leverage to do that. And if they want, they can definitely consider that. So these are some of the small examples, but still all the other international mechanisms that have been there, Afghan women have tried to engage, although there have been a lot of challenges that they have been faced with as well. But still, international community play a very critical role in ensuring that all these existing tools on international law for delivering justice are effectively used to restore the women's rights.
Thank you, Hanifa. And a reminder that resources are important, that there are precedent for more formal mechanisms for evidence collection and preservation. Anna-Pála, I want to turn to you. Hanifa mentioned allied states, the importance, and we've said repeatedly in the room how important it is that as many countries that are supportive are really pounding the table in support for the rights of the women and girls of Afghanistan. So Iceland, of course, is one of the 26 states that announced support for raising the dispute under CEDAW with Afghanistan, and very broadly speaking, a leading voice for gender justice in international fora. And I've had the privilege of personally being there when you have been such an effective advocate on the international plane, and thank you for that. So I want to really go to you from a perspective of a state seeking to advance accountability, and in light of what you've heard here, what would you say are the most important principles guiding international accountability efforts vis-a-vis the Taliban?
Thanks so much, Catherine, and it's really great to be able to be with you again this year, even if I'm not there in person, which I regret because last year was really empowering. I remember we cried a lot together, which was healthy and healing. Now, at the outset, I just want to be clear that Iceland does not recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government of Afghanistan, and that's important to repeat. And when we speak of accountability, I think it's important to speak of it in every sense, not just legally, but politically as well, even if the focus here is mostly legal. With that behind us, thanks for alluding to Iceland's emphasis on and commitment to gender equality, both at home and abroad. And we do have our own challenges, of course, but we try to overcome them. We now have a new government, which is led by 3 women, and one of them is my foreign minister. She has just come back from Geneva, where she apparently has spoken to every single person she met almost on the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan, and has been very clear internally also here that she wants to find ways of standing with women and girls in Afghanistan. And notably in fighting for their human rights. That's something we shouldn't forget. But it's as simple as that. We're asking for human rights for all. A little bit further on the Human Rights Council, because Iceland is now a new voting member of the council. And Hanifa touched on this previously, and it's an important point that I want to make. And I know my minister was discussing this in Geneva last week. We fully support the great work of the special rapporteur, and we also believe that the extremely serious situation merits an accountability mechanism for human rights violations. Let me sneak in a little advertisement on a conference which is taking place in Paris on 7th March, because in Paris at UNESCO, where Iceland is on the board, we have been working hard to raise awareness on the situation of girls and women in Afghanistan, together with Canada, of course. And there will be a conference on the topic on March 7th. And remember, UNESCO is the agency responsible for education, for instance. Now onwards to the CEDAW initiative. Last fall, as you mentioned, Catherine, we joined a diverse group, cross-regional group of countries that announced publicly their support for raising the dispute under CEDAW. And that diversity was important to us. And I know it also was to Canada and the 3 other Western countries. that launched the formal process. But there was a declaration that was published by the group in September. And if I'm going to make any point at all today, it's this, and I will read from the declaration. Afghan women themselves have shown courageous leadership in calling for accountability. We recognize their vital role and heed their call. Those words capture perfectly the policy of Iceland here. And I think in plain language, the most important thing is that Afghan women do not need saving. They need support in fighting their own fight for the human rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. Which is why I agree with you, Catherine, that the meaningful participation of Afghan women themselves in this process is essential, and photo ops are enormous. A few more words on this. This would be a watershed moment at the ICJ if it goes all the way, because it would be the first time the ICJ interprets CEDAW, and about time, I say. If and when it comes to it, if there will be proceedings and a judgment, the hope of Iceland would be for it to be a helpful judgment, in the sense that full use would be made of everything CEDAW has to offer, if you will. And it's important to remember what a range of rights CEDAW guarantees, and that Afghanistan ratified CEDAW without reservations. Now, lastly, I'm conscious of the time because we want to have discussions later on, but speaking of legal tools, I can't resist responding to Nahid and the others that have brought this up today. Convincing arguments are being made, notably by Afghan women, by so many others, of course, but by Afghan women themselves, that there is a legal gap in international law that the concept of gender apartheid could fill. The position of Iceland is that we hear this call and we believe it merits discussion, as we have raised on a number of occasions, including on the political level. I think that will be for now.
Thank you very much. And you hit on all of the important themes, I think, and what it means to be a hero state on the international plane. So thank you for that and everything that you're doing. So we are getting a bit short on time, but Wazhma, I want to turn to you for a moment. So we've talked about this ICJ, the potential ICJ case at several points. So could you address, and I'll ask you to just stick to 5 minutes if you could, but if you could address what steps, concrete steps can be taken to center, to make meaningful the voices of Afghan women, both in country and the diaspora in the ICJ initiative?
Thank you. I think in terms of a strategy, particularly these 4 countries, they need to put together a joint strategy on how they want to take this process further. And maybe that strategy could be actually shared with the women of Afghanistan, different groups of, women as well, so that they could actually be aware about what steps are coming. I understand the confidentiality aspect, but it's important for us to know what Canada is planning, what Germany is planning. For example, like next week we have a meeting in Berlin, where a lot of Afghan women are being invited, and a consultation is taking place. But we would have very much, appreciated if we were part of the agenda setting, right? Like, it's not just health, education, and women's political participation that's important for us, right? There are other rights as well. So, like, it's important to put Afghan women aware about these processes, so like a strategy in place. But the other thing is also about the inclusion of, experts, legal experts from Afghan, communities, particularly male, female, different experts who have been working on the legal sector, who can actually provide a lot of inputs in terms of how the Afghan legal system have been violated by the Taliban as well, because the domestic the setting is also very important, that the Taliban have not just violated, CEDAW, which is one obligation of the Afghan state, but they have also, overturned the legal system in a systematic and oppressive way that actually amounts to gender apartheid. So we want this process to support the other international legal processes, not just for Afghanistan, but for women across the world, for justice, global justice as well, so that if there is this case supports gender apartheid movement and bringing codification of the gender apartheid, for example, that would also be an important achievement. And at the same time, the transparency in this process is so critical. Like, what actually happens in this process? Who is being included? What is the negotiation? It's important to communicate that to the people. And lastly, I think it's also important to create new alliances. The Taliban leader that we haven't seen, I'm afraid that tomorrow morning the Taliban will have an announcement and say, Hibatullah died. And the story is over. So we were actually pushing for other members of the Taliban to be included, like Minister of Education. He continuously pushes higher education, the Vice and Virtue Minister, who actually is behind the intelligence. So they also need to listen to us, that there are many other actors in the Taliban, groups that are actually implementing and enforcing these, violations. Thank you.
Understood, and thank you for that. So within the bounds of confidentiality, but a certain deliberateness about transparency where possible in terms of strategy going forward. Thank you for that. So I'm going to switch gears in the time that we have to go to the ICC. So I'm going to go first, Valerie, to give you a chance to speak, and then Shinkai, I'm going to come back to you on the ICC. So Valerie, we've obviously spent a lot of time talking about the decision of the Office of the Prosecutor with respect to recommending charges. What is the significance of that decision for gender justice, both within and beyond Afghanistan, from your perspective?
There are several reasons, Catherine, why this particular application for arrest warrants is significant, though I do want to acknowledge that Afghan women have been fighting for their rights for a long time, and that their evidence is what makes these cases possible. So, of course, it's the first set of arrest warrants in the Afghanistan situation, and Afghan women, countries around the world, and civil society have been calling for some action by the prosecutor regarding the Taliban's persecution of Afghan women and girls for quite some time. It's also interesting that the prosecutor charged the persecution of Afghan women and girls across Afghanistan, because oftentimes warrants of arrest relate to very particular actions in particular places. So this is wide-ranging. As well, he's requested charges for the persecution of people, of LGBTI plus individuals, and people whom the Taliban perceive as allies of girls and women across Afghanistan. And this is the first time in the history of the ICC that charges related to LGBTQI plus persecution have been requested. Also, this case is the very first time the prosecutor has charged the crime of persecution on gender on its own. This is the only crime charged, and the focus of the case is therefore squarely and entirely on gender persecution. He's charged these two leaders with severely depriving a wide range of fundamental human rights, and then has linked those human rights violations to crimes under the Rome Statute. And this link between severe human rights violations and the ICC crimes is so very important. I'll also mention that his office further submitted that the Taliban's interpretation of Sharia should not and cannot be used to justify the deprivation of these fundamental human rights or the related Rome Statute crimes that the human rights violations are linked to. And I mention this because in a recent case, unfortunately, of Al-Hassan in the Mali situation, one judge accepted arguments of cultural relativism to excuse the accused of all crimes committed by a radical rebel group aligned with Al-Qaeda, which imposed a regime of gender persecution in Timbuktu. The case is also important because it's part of the prosecutor's implementation of his office's own 2022 policy on the crime of gender persecution and the 2023 revised policy on gender-based crime. And those represent a part of course correction of the Office of the Prosecutor after years of failing to secure convictions for sexual and gender-based violence crimes and other gender-type crimes. And that course was only recently turned around as a result of convictions in two other cases called Entaganda and Ongwen. So this Afghanistan case is part of the course correction. But I will mention quickly two things we need to pay close attention to. First of all, while there are a few cases to look at within the ICC on persecution on gender grounds, this is the very first one where the charges are charged on their own. So we have to look at how the judges react to having this charge stand on its own. But if there's any case in which to charge gender persecution on its own, of course, this is the case. Secondly, we need to look at how the judges discuss linkage, because in the past, judges have sometimes dismissed gender-related charges because they felt that the evidence linking the leaders with the crimes on the ground has not been strong enough. So for those of us who watch closely gender-related cases, linkage is always something that we focus on. And lastly, of course, the next step for these warrants is for the ICC judges to confirm that there's enough evidence to support them. If they accept the warrants, states will be obligated to enforce them. In reality, there are obstacles to actually arrest accused in almost any ICC case, but the warrants will impede the ability to travel of the people who are charged and will put the world on notice that they are wanted by the ICC, and this should help impede normalization of the Taliban by at least the ICC states parties. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you very much. And you've laid out quite nicely that course correction. And unfortunately, it's only been in the last 5 years, even though gender persecution has been on the books for decades. But thank you for that. Shinkai, if I could ask you to do, given the time, 2 minutes just on the significance question, please.
It has like a significance, like implication on in Afghanistan and on a global stage as well. The first thing is that gender-based violence and persecution it's not only very strong violation of rights, but also considered as a crime under international law. It's a great message to all these Taliban leaders or any leaders globally. If they violate the fundamental human rights of male or female, they will be accountable for that. So this is a great significance. And of course, it's a great hope. And for women of Afghanistan, the struggle they went through, the suffering they went through, globally recognized, and gave them a hope that justice is possible, whether it's very difficult situation, but they will receive that in this critical situation. And also, this is like a ICC, what warrant or the request for warrant happened. They're reaffirming that that any violation will not be tolerated under international law.
Thank you very much. So we have just 6 minutes remaining, so I'm going to do a round robin for some closing thoughts. Anna-Pála, can I just go to you and we're going to keep everyone just to 2 minutes, please. Anna-Pála, you in your final thoughts would love for you to address potential leveraging of these developments with respect to ICJ, with respect to the ICC arrest warrants in diplomatic and political channels. Please go ahead.
All right. Well, I think the starting point in terms of diplomatic and political efforts has to be to prevent normalization of the Taliban as a government, and what would follow, essentially speaking, legitimization of a form of governance based on discrimination and oppression. I think the legal action and the outcomes can help with that. And I think it's, in terms of the ICC, extremely important that we see those arrest warrants actually out there, because that shows us that crimes against women and LGBTQ plus persons, etc., in Afghanistan are taken seriously enough. And I will mention what I said to Karim Khan at the UN in New York when asking him how is the investigation on Afghanistan going. It's to destroy a person, you can do that in other ways than killing her, and I think that's something important to keep in mind of in terms of the Afghanistan situation and the ICC. I will also highlight, politically speaking, and in terms of the UN and third states, of course, it's just vital that Afghan women need to be at the table when the future of the country, their future, is being discussed. And I think there has to be a stronger call for that in international fora. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Zarifa, if I could go to you for just 2 minutes of just final thoughts on the conversation.
گرچه برنامه خوبی بود، ما امیدوار هستیم که از این برنامه های ادامه پیدا کنن. حداقل زنان معترض که 3 سال در مقابل طالب مبارزه کردن و چهره طالب نشان دادن، دقیقاً در هر جای، چی در کشورهای اروپایی، چی در کشورهای کانادا و یا امریکا برگزار میشه، ما امیدوار هستیم که از زنان معترض هم دعوت شه و تا نظریات و چشم دیدی که در مقابل طالب تجربه کردن شریک نماید.
Okay, so Zarifa said that first of all, thank you for this program, but accountability means that whenever there is a meeting or a program about Afghanistan and about women's rights and human rights, wherever, if it's in US, Canada, or Europe, the women of Afghanistan should be invited, because we can share the first-hand information and the thing that we have gone through ourselves, we can share those information, and that would be helpful for decision-making and whatever.
Thank you very much. We have been given the grace of a slight extension to take 2 questions from the audience, and then I'll go to just final thoughts. Thank you. Please go ahead. We'll need to get you a microphone for those online. Thank you. That's quicker.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing the event, and I would like to thank all the panelists for being the voice of Afghan women in such a critical moment. My question is, my question is, what step can we take to create a unified platform for Afghan women's voices in Canadian policymaking? Thank you.
Can we get another question in the back, please? If you could pass the mic. Thank you so much.
First, thank you so much. My name is Ajmal Ramir. I am leading an organization called Afghans for Progressive Thinking. Thank you for the organizers for organizing this event. My question, it's already been mentioned by some of the panelists. Regarding like the recent changes and the recent ban from the Trump on foreigner aid, it will definitely affect those organizations who were active in Afghanistan and they were working with young women inside Afghanistan. So how both Canada and also the different civil society organization can ensure that voices of women from inside Afghanistan can amplified and also can be included in the negotiation, whether it's legal, whether it's a kind of representing in these kinds of platforms, because we see that it's hard to get disconnected from young women inside Afghanistan, but there are different other ways that we can continue keeping engaged. For example, through our organization, we are helping young women and girls, so they are writing articles, policy brief, recommendations, so their names and their identities are remain unknown. So, but those voices are through voices that can be needed to be amplified. So this is something that I want to bring, that this should be considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to go to 1 minute lightning round. Shinkai, if you could go, Wazhma, and then Hanifa to round us out. So please, you can address the questions or anything else you want in your closing.
Thank you very much for today's event. Definitely, this not only to hear women's voice here or ICC or ICJ, but it's most important how to give the right tool the woman needed, the right platform, and so the way they can strongly advocate and shape their future they want. Definitely regarding all this question or identifying Afghan women's voice, which is really crucial, we need it. Hopefully there's global affairs organize some event to bring women from different part of Canada or even from different part of the world, which women are scattered globally, to come together, talk about all those differences and come and give one unified message to the world and support. And the way Trump government stop all this aid and support, of course, if they want to really Afghan women to support the people of Afghanistan, not only women, the men and women of Afghanistan, and keep them alive. So they have to continue and provide resources. Otherwise, this is the way they are like indirectly doing the worse than the Taliban, what are they doing to the people of Afghanistan.
I would conclude that when you have a de facto authorities, I wouldn't call the Taliban the government, but when a de facto authority, oppresses people, they are the direct complicit, right? They are the direct oppressor. But then the countries that engage with them, they are also indirectly complicit, right? And we forget that in international, accountability mechanisms. When the Taliban Minister of Health went to Japan last week, when the Taliban Minister of Trade went to Indonesia the week before, and, the two Taliban, the Haqqanis actually were able to go to UAE. And the Security Council actually waived their travel sanction, restrictions. That tells you a lot about how much the global justice and accountability mechanisms actually make sense on the ground realities. So I think it's critical that we also hold the states that are engaging with the Taliban accountable, particularly the regional countries, China, as well, Pakistan and many other Central Asian countries that are part of the trade agreements with the Taliban. And the last thing about the Canada's role, particularly in the light of the recent US freeze of the funding, like we have been told to stop our activities, we got to stop, freeze email from them. So now we really hope that Canada would speed up the C-41, the bill, the authorization for local organizations, because that is also an important, sort of a step that our organizations can work inside Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Hanifa, 1 minute, please. Final thoughts. You're on mute.
Thank you, Catherine. I think I would reiterate with what Wazhma Jan just mentioned, that there's a huge gap in documenting the human rights violations and women rights violations that are being committed by the Taliban, and specifically on the work of the local organizations that are working on the ground. We know that all these international law mechanisms that are working, they need evidence from the ground. They need organizations on the grassroots level that can document these evidence, that can raise awareness about what's going on. For example, if a girl at class 11 is deprived from her rights of education, she doesn't even know that there's an international legal mechanism existing that can address what's happening to her and can deliver justice to her. She don't know what ICC is. She don't know what ICG is. So we need grassroots organizations to raise awareness on these issues. And also, we know the big names. We know what is happening on the public level. We can see all the edicts being issued by the Taliban supreme leaders. We can see the vice and virtue law, but we don't know what is happening on the local level, the atrocities that are being committed, not only just by Hibatullah, but also by the low-level Taliban members against women and girls, about which nobody knows nothing, especially in Pashtun areas, where unfortunately the focus has also been just on areas and on women we can hear about who have access to certain group that are working on this area, that are advocating, but then there are women who don't have access to any one of them. So there's a huge gap in this area, and I think Canada and other UN member states can fill up this gap by providing more support, including the financial and technical support to the grassroots organizations who can fill this gap and provide sufficient resources for all these international mechanisms to effectively conduct their work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking this remarkable array of panelists.
I would also like to thank what an extraordinary panel از صمیم قلب از همکاران گرامی سپاسگزارم. It was really extraordinary. And Catherine, thank you for moderating a panel which could have gone on for much longer with the extraordinary wealth of experience. So for the online audience, we are now going to pause. And panel 3 will begin after lunch at 1:20 p.m. So the live stream will end now. For those of you that are here, we are going to have a networking lunch at the upper library where you had coffee earlier. I would ask if you could please be back here promptly at 1:15 p.m. when panel 3 begins. And for the 3 in-person panelists, Hadiya Amiri, Mewand Rehyab, and Zarqa Yaftali, please be here at 1 p.m., not 1:15, for some setup that we need to take care of. Thank you once again.
Thank you.